Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and today I thought I would talk a little bit about my reading in 2017 and my reading goals for 2018. So in 2017 I have read 120 books, which I am pretty happy with. It might say on Goodreads I've read a few less because I also do count a few books I have read which are novels by friends of mine which aren't published yet, so I cannot record them on Goodreads, but I put them in my own list and I still count them because they are still books I've read this year. Of the 120 books I read this year, I have read 1 graphic novel, 1 literary magazine, 12 non-fiction books, 11 short story collections, 4 poetry collections and 91 novels, which is quite a lot of novels. I am really amazed to find that this year I have read 1 more non-fiction book than short story collection. That was quite a surprise. But anyway, out of the 120 books I read this year, 20 of them were rereads, which is about 17%, so that's quite high, but I really enjoyed all of the books I reread this year, as well as my standard sort of top books of 2017. I'm also going to do a separate video on my top rereads of 2017 because there were a lot of books that I absolutely adored rediscovering this year. And then the other thing I noted amongst my reading, which I thought was quite interesting, is that out of the 120 books I read this year, 56 of them were Victorian, which is nearly half, that's about 47%. So a lot of the books I read this year were Victorian, which I think I'm happy with. Although on the one hand I love Victorian literature an awful lot and part of me just wants to read a lot of Victorian literature, I also feel that that is quite a high proportion of my reading to come from one particular subset of literature. However, it is my favourite subset, so maybe that's okay. I think this coming year, in 2018, I might aim to have that figure a little bit lower, but more I think because I want to read a wider variety of classics more than because I necessarily want to read less classics. Because looking down my list of all the books I read this year, there were a lot of Victorian books and there were very, very, very few other classics. I think there were maybe 5 Edwardian books, which was basically like Peter Pan and some Sherlock Holmes books, and then a couple of modern classics, but in general, mostly Victorian, and I didn't read anything pre-Victorian this year apart from the Chinese classic Monkey. So yeah, I guess that was this year in reading, and time to talk about the goals for 2018. So in 2018 I will be keeping my reading challenge on Goodreads at 100 books. I imagine that it's probably going to just stay at 100 books for the foreseeable future because I think that's roughly about what I read in a year. And another goal for the year is just to keep on rereading because I have been really loving rereading this year. As I said, 20 of the books I read this year were rereads and I love them so much. And there are certainly a few more of my favourite Victorian books that I read when I was a teenager that I haven't read since. For example, The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope, which I'm so excited to reread at some point this year. Another thing I would quite like to do this year is reread some of my favourite modern books that I read when I was a teenager. For example, Diane Setterfield's The 13th Tale, which I have read twice, but not for a couple of years now. And I'd also quite like to reread some Kate Morton, because when I was a teenager, The House at the Riverton and The Forgotten Garden were 2 of my favourite books, and they were amongst a very small amount of books that I read that weren't from the 19th century, and I loved them greatly, and I don't really remember them very much, and I don't know how I would feel about them now, and so I quite like to rediscover them. Another thing I'd really like to reread is A Dance to the Music of Time by Anthony Powell, which is a 12-book long series that I read when I was about 18, and I love them so much. They remain one of my favourite literary works, but it was 6 years ago. I would like to reread them and rediscover them, and I actually have them on audiobook now, and I think I'm going to buddy read them with Caroline from Caroline's Reading Rambles. I'd like to keep on rereading books, and I'd like to keep rereading books in general, not just for specific videos, which is what I have done mostly this year. However, I think my main sort of reading goal for 2018 is one of those read your own damn books goals, in that I would like to get through some of the books on my shelf that I haven't read yet. So on my shelves in my flat I have 57 unread books, which is not actually that many. That is not all the unread books I own. I probably have another like 40 unread books at my parents' house, which I would also like to get to, but I don't have space for here. And I would like to try and get through quite a lot of those books this year, the ones that are in this flat. And actually, like 57, it's perfectly conceivable that I would be able to read all of those books this year, though I don't think I will, but I will try. So one thing I'm going to do is put myself on a bit of a book buying ban. I don't really have the space for any more books, and I have so many books that I own that I really want to read that I don't feel I can justify it to myself very much. I'm not gonna like make it a permanent proper ban. I'm just gonna try and avoid buying books, and I think I will have a rule with myself where if there's ever a London Booktube meetup, I'm free for the day and I can buy books, because that's part of the fun of the Booktube meetups, and also because it's very hard and there are a lot of other people there recommending books to you, all of whom are very good at recommending books because they have had a lot of practice on the internet. So I think the rest of the time I'm gonna ban myself not only from buying books like physical books, but also from downloading free Victorian Kindle books. One of the things I found this year is that I read a lot on Kindle, which I don't mind, but it means I neglect all the books that are sat on my shelves which I would like to read. One, so I can know if I like them or not, and two, so if I don't like them I can give them to charity shops and have more space for other books. And I spent a lot of time reading books on Kindle that I downloaded free, which is great and they're free so it's fine, but at the same time I'm not getting to the books that are on my shelves, some of which have been there for years, and I don't mean like 2 or 3 years, I mean like 10 years. And also to help me get through the books that are on my shelves, I have a TBR jar. So I have done this before. I think I had a TBR jar slash a TBR bowl in 2015, and I did it for half the year, and then I moved house half through the year. Me and Nick moved in together. I didn't have much space, I didn't have all of my unread books with me, and I just decided to stop and give up on that. But it was going fairly well for the first half of the year, and I do think it's a really good idea and a really nice idea, so I decided that I would do it again. So this is my jar. In this I have all the 57 unread books that I own in a jar. I thought what I would do with my TBR jar is, rather than just pick out one each month and read it, is an idea I partly got from Olive, from a book Olive. She was talking about her 2018 reading goals, and she was talking about randomly picking 3 books a month from her TBR that she has to read, but she only has to read one of them, so she still gets a choice, and you can still kind of read with your mood, which I thought was a really good idea, because actually I feel like I don't necessarily want to read all books at all times. So I think what I will do is pick 2 out every month from this jar, but I'm only going to read one of them and I'll put one back. So basically the one I feel like reading I can read, and if there's one that I'm not really in the mood for I can just put it back and it will come up another month. In terms of the rest of my reading, I'm not going to set myself a yearly TBR. I would like to get through as many of those 57 books as possible, but we'll see how I go. But I do have one book that I'm determined that I will read in 2018, and that is War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. I started this in July and I read 100 pages and I stopped. I don't want to go so far as to say I DNF'd it, because I was absolutely loving it, but this book is really huge and it's too big to go in a bag, it's heavy, it's really hard to fit in places, and also it's a nice edition. It's the vintage classics one and it's pretty and I don't want to damage it. But I do almost all my reading on my commute to and from work in the morning, which means that if I have a book which I don't feel able to read on my commute, it just doesn't get read. But I am determined to read this because I loved Anna Karenina. I loved the TV adaptation that was on last year. I loved the first 100 pages I read. I heard a lot of people talking about it when Ange and Yamini were doing the read-along back in June, which I just kind of missed. And I think what I'm going to try and do, which I think will work better, is rather than trying to read like a chapter before bed, which never ends up happening because I always go to bed too late anyway, I think I'm going to try and read a couple of chapters every day when I get home from work, and then I will actually have a set time when I do it, but a time that probably will remain as it is rather than getting pushed to the side because I want to sleep instead. So that's my plan, we'll see how it goes. I'm hoping to start this quite soon. In terms of the rest of my reading, I would probably like to read more non-fiction than I do. Saying that, I feel like 11 books is kind of fine for non-fiction in a year, but most of that was in the last few months of the year. I'm not gonna force myself to a particular rule of reading sort of one non-fiction book a month, but I think my aim will be one every month or 2, and we'll just kind of see how that goes. I would probably also like to read more poetry just in general. I read very little this year, which is a shame because I do really enjoy poetry. It's just, again, a bit like non-fiction, not something I ever think to pick up. And another thing I would like to do is read more short story collections, or kind of get back into short story collections. Started doing my list of my favourite books of 2017, and a lot of them are short story collections, but they're all from the first half of the year because I kind of just stopped reading them in the second half of the year and didn't read very many at all, which is a real shame because I love them so much. So I think that kind of just fell by the wayside, and I want to start picking them up again a bit more in 2018, and I will probably aim for about 1 a month. But I think that's all I have to say in terms of my reading goals. I'm going to talk briefly about my Booktube goals for 2018. Nick and I have started doing our poetry series. We did a video on Christmas poems, which I'll link down below, and from now on we will be doing this poetry series. I don't know how regularly, it'll just depend on the time we have, but we will be reading a poetry collection, buddy reading a poetry collection together, I suppose, and then making a video where we discuss that poetry collection, because both of us really like poetry and don't read enough. So I'm really looking forward to doing that, and that will be coming up in the next year. The not so hypothetical Victorian literature course will be continuing. I know there hasn't been a video for a while, but there will be one in January. I'm about to start rereading Far from the Madding Crowd for that purpose, and I've already reread Wuthering Heights, and I'll be talking about those 2 books and the presentation of landscape and sort of rural areas in them, which I'm really looking forward to doing, and I think doing it every 3 months, which I'll be doing doing from now on is much more manageable than doing it every 2 months. Another thing that will be happening this year is a new Dickens along, or Dickens Victorian style serialised read along, where I and whoever wants to join in reads a Charles Dickens novel in its original serial parts over the course of 18 months. So we have just finished Our Mutual Friend, and the next one will be starting this year. I put up a poll on the Goodreads group of what book people wanted to do. I suggested Bleak House, Little Dorrit and Dombey and Son because they are my 3 other favourite Dickens novels and the ones that I think I'd have the most to say about. The poll is still open, but I think it's fair to say that Bleak House has won. Bleak House has 52 votes, Little Dorrit has 31 and Dombey and Son has 22 votes. I think the poll is set as being open until the 18th of January, so if you do want to go and vote and you haven't already, please do feel free to do so. But I think it's fair to say that it will almost certainly be Bleak House, which I am excited about because I love Bleak House and I'm curious to reread it because it's been a few years since I last read it, and I know I will have so much to say about it because it's really, really rich. So I need to work out when we're going to start. I wanted to have a few months off doing a serialised read-along, but also the very original serialisation of Bleak House started in March, and I do quite like the idea of reading it in like the months that it would have been done, so it might be starting in March. There will be an announcement video soon. I'm gonna have a look through Bleak House and find myself a physical copy. Oh no, I do have one. I do have one. I do. It's here. We're all good. We're all good. It's tiny. Oh no, I'm gonna have to get a new one because I want to write on it. You know what I was saying? Remember what I was saying about not buying any more books? But also this year I was thinking I'd quite like to do a few other read-alongs which are not serialised in that fashion. I'd quite like to do a read-along of A Christmas Carol in December, obviously. I know that's like a year away, but just heads up, that might be happening this December. And I'd also quite like to do read-alongs of sort of non-Victorian books. I mentioned earlier that I'd really like to reread The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield, so I might potentially do a read-along of that maybe in the autumn time, because I feel like it's quite a kind of autumnal book, so maybe September-ish or something. I'll have a think about that, but that's one of my favourite books. In fact, it is my favourite non-Victorian book, so I would quite like to host a read-along of that. I think that's most of my Booktube goals. Like I said, I don't have many new ideas currently, but I'm sure there will be more in the future. In general, it will be more of the same. Before I go, I do quickly want to talk about some writing goals, because I know I've done this before, and although I don't seem to talk about writing on my channel as much as I used to, it is still a big, important part of my life, and it is still something I have kind of goals for, and I suppose it is relevant to books and things. So, sorry. In the last year, I have been working on 2 separate books, and I'm intending on working on both of them in 2018 for most of 2018. Both of them are finished in the sense that they have been written in one form or another, and they both are at like second draft stage, where I've written them and then I've rewritten them, but they still need a lot of work. One of them is a literary sort of historical 20th century fiction novel, which has been sent to my literary agent. We had a long chat on the phone a couple of weeks ago about ways in which I can rework it and rewrite it. I have a lot of editing and rewriting and changes to do, some sort of more minor things and some bigger structural changes. So I have a lot of reworking to do on this book, which I'm very excited about, but I think will probably take up my first maybe like 6 months of this year. That's the plan, that's the goal. I want to have that done and much better by sort of midway through this year. And then my other book that I've been working on in the last year is set in the Victorian period, which I know I've spoken about on this channel before, and I want to rework and rewrite that as well, probably in the second half of this year. This hasn't gone to Louise yet, this hasn't been seen by my agent because it's not ready. I've written it, I have the book, but I need to sort out a lot of the historical details. I need to kind of add in more history. There's a lot of things I can do with it that I haven't done yet. I feel like I have the bare bones of it, and some of the detail and the writing and the characters, but not enough of the meat of it. So I've got a lot of work to do on that as well, which I'm very excited about. I'm very fond of that book, so I'm looking forward to working on that as well, probably more in the second half of the year. And then I also might do NaNoWriMo in 2018. I don't know, I'm not certain, and I might just be saying this because it's been a month since NaNoWriMo 2017 finished and I didn't do it, and I watched lots of people on Booktube who did it, for example Sylvia Kay and Catadactyl, and it looked like fun and I felt sad that I wasn't doing it. I've done NaNoWriMo before, I've done it 4 times before, and I've completed it 4 times before. I enjoy doing NaNoWriMo, I find it fun, I really love the community aspect of it, and because the way I write in general is to write really, really fast and then go back and rewrite and edit later, I don't find it too unnatural. So I did did NaNoWriMo in 2015 and then I didn't do it for the last 2 years. One of the reasons why I stopped doing it was because in 2015 I did NaNoWriMo, I wrote 60,000 words and it was rubbish and I didn't like it, and I decided I didn't like the idea, I thought my writing was really bad, and I scrapped it and I gave up on the book. And I haven't given up on a book for quite a long time. I normally finish them and get to the end of the story even if I don't sort of edit and do all the after work that is most of the work when you write like I do. Like I said, so one of the ways in which I work is I write really fast and then I go back and edit later, but there are books that I wrote when I was 18 that I've gone back to and completely rewritten and reworked and made a lot better and that I'm now really proud of, but I've never gone back and rewritten a book that I wrote in NaNoWriMo, though I have 3.5 of them, and the reason why is because I don't think what I write in NaNoWriMo is very good. And I know that's kind of the point, but I think part of the point of NaNoWriMo is to show yourself that you can write a book, and because I write a lot and I've finished books, I know I can write a book. And if the stuff I write in NaNoWriMo is no good, then is it really worth doing? That's the problem. And that's why I stopped doing it. However, I really love the community aspect and I think it's actually a really good time for experimenting. And so what I thought I might do is I might do it this year, especially because I'm planning on spending like the majority of 2018 editing rather than writing. Or that's not exactly true, rewriting rather than writing, but it's very different to starting something completely new from scratch. And I have 2 particular ideas that I like, but I'm not like utterly committed to, and I'm not like prepared to spend like 6 months or a year working on a book of that idea, but I might be prepared to commit 1 month to seeing if it works or not. So I might do NaNoWriMo. I really want to do NaNoWriMo because I really enjoy it, and maybe if I really enjoy it, that's fine, and it doesn't matter if what I produce is not very good and doesn't satisfy me at the end. Maybe it's enough that it's really fun and the community aspect is really enjoyable, so I might do it this year. I don't know. We'll see, we will see. So yes, those are all the reading, writing and booktube goals I have for 2018. I'm sorry this was a long video. I really thought this would be like a 7-minute one, but no, sorry, that doesn't happen on my channel very much, does it? So I feel like that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know down in the comments how your 2017 was in terms of reading and what you're reading, and maybe booktube goals are for the 2018 year. That was a weird way to phrase it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.